Maya Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she rushed between tables at Romano's restaurant. It was only 2 p.m., but she had already been working for 6 hours straight. Her feet ached in the cheap shoes she bought from a discount store last month, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Every table meant tips, and every tip meant another day her mother could get her medicine. The lunch crowd at Romano's was different from other restaurants where Maya had worked before. Here, men in expensive suits talked about million-dollar deals while cutting into steaks that cost more than Maya made in a week. Women with designer handbags complained if their water glasses weren't refilled every 5 minutes. Maya had learned to smile and nod, even when customers treated her like she was invisible. "Excuse me, miss," called out a woman at table 7. Her voice was sharp and demanding. Maya hurried over, balancing 3 plates on her arm. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? This soup is cold. I asked for it to be hot. Do you understand what hot means?" Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment as other customers turned to look. "I'm so sorry. Let me get you a fresh bowl right away." She took the soup back to the kitchen, trying not to let the woman's rude tone get to her. Tony, the head chef, looked at her sympathetically. "Rough table?" he asked, ladling hot soup into a new bowl. "They're all rough tables," Maya sighed. "But the tips are better here than anywhere else I've worked." Tony nodded. He knew about Maya's situation. Everyone at Romano's did. She never complained, but they could see the tiredness in her eyes. The way she picked up every extra shift available. How she ate leftover bread rolls for lunch to save money. Maya carried the fresh soup back to table 7, apologizing again. The woman barely looked at her as she tasted it. "Better," she said dismissively, then continued her conversation about her upcoming vacation to Europe. As Maya walked away, she felt the familiar weight of the small photograph in her apron pocket. She touched it gently like she always did when work got particularly hard. It was her only picture of her father, taken when he was young and wearing his military uniform. On the back, in faded blue ink, was his signature and a message. "For my beautiful Isabella, all my love always." Maya had never met her father. Her mother, Isabella, had raised her alone, working multiple jobs just like Maya was doing now. Isabella always spoke about Maya's father with a mixture of love and sadness that Maya never fully understood. "He was a good man," Isabella would say whenever Maya asked about him. "He had big dreams and a kind heart. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices, mija." Maya never pushed for more details. She could see the pain in her mother's eyes whenever the subject came up. All she knew was that her father had left before she was born, and her mother had never heard from him again. Now, at 24, Maya was facing her own hard choices. Her mother had been diagnosed with diabetes 2 years ago, and the medical bills were crushing them. Isabella's condition had gotten worse recently, and she could barely work her part-time job at the grocery store. Most days, Maya felt like she was drowning in responsibilities. She had been halfway through college, studying business, when her mother got sick. Maya had to drop out to work full-time and take care of the medical expenses. Sometimes she lay awake at night, wondering what her life might have been like if things were different. But then she would hear her mother coughing in the next room, and Maya knew she had made the right choice. The afternoon shift continued with its usual challenges. A businessman at table 12 sent his pasta back twice, claiming it wasn't cooked properly. A group of teenagers left a mess on table 4 and barely left any tip. Maya cleaned it all up with the same professional smile she had perfected over the years. "You're amazing, you know that?" said Carmen, another waitress who had become Maya's closest friend at work. They were both restocking napkin holders during a brief lull between lunch and dinner. "I'm just doing my job," Maya replied. "Folding napkins with practiced efficiency? No, you're doing way more than that. I've seen you give your own tips to Luis when his kid was sick and he couldn't afford the doctor visit. I've watched you stay late to help clean even when you weren't scheduled. That's not just doing your job, Maya. That's having heart." Maya smiled, but she felt embarrassed by the praise. "My mom taught me to treat people the way I want to be treated, even when they don't deserve it." Carmen shook her head admiringly. "I don't know how you stay so positive. If I had your struggles, I'd probably be bitter by now." Maya thought about that for a moment. There were definitely days when she felt bitter. Days when she wanted to scream at rude customers or cry in the restaurant's bathroom. But then she would think about her mother's strength, how Isabella had raised her with love and dignity, despite having so little money. Maya wanted to make her mother proud. Some days are harder than others, Maya admitted, but giving up isn't an option. My mom needs me. As the evening crowd started arriving, Maya noticed the restaurant's atmosphere change. The dinner customers were even wealthier than the lunch crowd. She watched expensive cars pull up outside, sleek black sedans and sports cars that probably cost more than Maya would make in her entire lifetime. Romano's had a reputation for attracting powerful business people. Maya often heard conversations about corporate mergers, real estate deals, and investments. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to have that kind of money, to never worry about paying bills or buying groceries. But mostly she tried not to think about it. Wanting things she couldn't have would only make her miserable. Instead, Maya focused on what she could control, working hard, saving every penny possible, and taking care of her mother. The dinner rush was about to begin, and Maya straightened her uniform and checked her appearance in the small mirror by the staff entrance. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and despite her exhaustion, her eyes still held their natural warmth. She touched the photograph in her pocket one more time, took a deep breath, and walked back into the dining room. She had no idea that this evening would change her life forever. She didn't know that among the wealthy customers arriving for dinner was a man whose signature matched the one on her father's photograph. Maya was simply focused on getting through another shift, earning enough tips to cover her mother's prescription refill, and maybe having enough left over for groceries. As she approached the hostess stand to check her table assignments for the evening, Maya saw a group of well-dressed men being seated at table 15. The hostess, Jennifer, looked slightly nervous as she showed them to their seats. "That's table 15, Jennifer whispered to Maya. "They requested our best service. The man in the dark suit is apparently some big-shot CEO. Be extra careful with them, okay?" Maya nodded and gathered her order pad and pen. Just another table of important people who probably wouldn't even notice her face. She had served hundreds of customers just like them. This evening would be different, though she had no way of knowing it yet. Walking toward table 15 with her professional smile in place, Maya was simply a hard-working young woman trying to make ends meet. She was someone's daughter, carrying her father's photograph and her mother's strength, ready to face whatever challenges the evening might bring. Alexander Sterling stepped out of his black Mercedes at exactly 7:30 p.m. His driver, Robert, quickly came around to open the door, but Alexander was already standing on the sidewalk, checking his expensive watch. He was never late for business meetings, and tonight was too important for any mistakes. At 52 years old, Alexander had built Sterling Industries from nothing into a company worth billions of dollars. His sharp gray eyes and confident walk commanded respect wherever he went. People in business circles knew his name and feared his reputation. When Alexander Sterling wanted something, he usually got it, but tonight felt different. As he straightened his dark blue suit and walked toward Romano's restaurant, Alexander felt an unusual nervousness in his chest. This wasn't just any business dinner. Tonight, he would finalize the biggest merger in his company's history, a deal that would make Sterling Industries one of the most powerful corporations in the country. The hostess at Romano's recognized him immediately. She had been told to expect him and his guests, and everything had to be perfect. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," she said with a bright smile. "Your table is ready. Right this way, please." Alexander followed her through the busy restaurant, his eyes scanning the room automatically. He always noticed details. It was one of the reasons for his success. He saw the expensive artwork on the walls, the way the lighting created an intimate atmosphere, and the well-dressed customers enjoying their meals. What Alexander didn't notice was the young waitress with dark hair who watched him walk past. Maya was serving table 12 when she saw the tall man in the expensive suit. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't figure out what. Maybe it was the confident way he walked, or how he held his head high. She shook off the feeling and returned to taking her customer's order. Alexander's guests were already waiting at table 15. There was Mr. Chen from Pacific Holdings, Ms. Williams from Global Finance, and their team of lawyers and advisors. These people controlled companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but even they seemed a little intimidated by Alexander's presence. Sterling. Mr. Chen stood up to shake hands. Good to see you again. I hope you're ready to make history tonight. Alexander smiled, but it was the cold smile of a businessman who knew he held all the cards. I'm always ready, Chen. The question is whether your people have done their homework. As they sat down, Alexander pulled out a leather folder containing the merger documents. This deal had taken 2 years to arrange. Pacific Holdings wanted to merge with Sterling Industries, which would create a massive company controlling shipping routes across 3 continents. Alexander would become even richer and more powerful than he already was. Should we order first or dive straight into business? Asked Ms. Williams, looking nervous despite her attempt to sound casual. Let's eat, Alexander said. I think better on a full stomach. That's when Maya approached their table. She had been assigned to serve the important guests, and Jennifer had warned her to be extra careful. Maya walked over with her order pad, trying not to show how nervous she felt. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies, she said politely. Welcome to Romano's. Can I start you with something to drink? Alexander looked up from his documents for the first time since sitting down. For just a moment, as his eyes met Maya's, something strange happened. There was a flicker of recognition, so brief that Alexander almost thought he had imagined it. Maya's face, her dark eyes, the shape of her smile, it reminded him of someone, but he couldn't place who. Wine, he said shortly, then looked back at his papers. Something red. You choose. Maya wrote down the order, feeling a bit confused by the man's reaction. For a second, it had seemed like he recognized her too, but that was impossible. Maya had never met anyone like this wealthy businessman before in her life. As she walked away to get their drinks, Alexander found himself glancing in her direction. There was something about that waitress that bothered him. Not bothered in a bad way, but like a memory he couldn't quite reach. He forced himself to focus on the business at hand. The shipping routes through Asia are our main concern, Mr. Chen was saying, spreading maps across the table. Your company controls the ports we need, but our ships have the capacity you're missing. Alexander nodded, but part of his mind was still thinking about the waitress. When she returned with their wine, he watched her pour the drinks with steady hands. She was professional and polite, but Alexander sensed there was more to her story. He had become successful partly because he was good at reading people, and this young woman had the look of someone carrying heavy responsibilities. Excellent choice, Alexander said, tasting the wine. Maya smiled and began taking their food orders. As the evening progressed, Alexander noticed more things about Maya, the way she moved efficiently between tables, how she handled difficult customers with patience, and most importantly, how she seemed to work harder than the other staff members. She reminded him of someone who was fighting for something important. During the main course, Alexander excused himself to make a phone call. As he walked past the kitchen area, he saw Maya sitting at a small table during her break. She was eating what looked like leftover bread and soup, probably the cheapest thing on the menu. In her hand was a small photograph that she was looking at with sad eyes. Alexander felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. He had been poor once, long ago before he built his fortune. He remembered what it felt like to worry about money, to work multiple jobs just to survive. But that was a part of his life he preferred not to think about anymore. When he returned to his table, the business discussion had moved to the final details of the merger. Lawyers were reviewing contracts, and everyone seemed satisfied with the terms. Alexander should have been celebrating. This deal would make him one of the richest men in the country. Instead, he found himself distracted by the waitress, who was now serving other tables. There was something in her movements, a grace and determination that reminded him of who? The memory was right there, just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. Sterling, are you listening? Ms. Williams asked, bringing his attention back to the table. Of course, Alexander replied smoothly. I was just thinking about the timeline for implementation. But that wasn't true. He was thinking about dark eyes and a familiar smile, about a young woman eating leftover bread while looking at an old photograph. He was thinking about his past, about choices he had made long ago that he had tried to forget. As the dinner continued, Alexander signed several preliminary documents. His signature was bold and distinctive, the same signature he had been using for over 25 years. It was a signature that had closed billion-dollar deals and changed the direction of entire industries. Maya approached their table again to refill water glasses. As she leaned over to pour Alexander's water, she accidentally glanced at the document he was signing. The pen moved across the paper in smooth, confident strokes, creating letters that seemed somehow familiar to her. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she finished pouring the water. That signature, she had seen it before. But where? She tried to remember, but customers at another table were calling for her attention. Alexander noticed her reaction. "Are you all right, miss?" "Yes, sir. Sorry, just tired," Maya replied quickly, then hurried away to help other customers. But Alexander continued watching her. There was definitely something about this young woman that was stirring memories he had buried deep. As the evening wore on, he found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on business. The merger documents were nearly complete when Alexander made an excuse to step outside for fresh air. He needed to clear his head and figure out why this waitress was affecting him so strongly. Standing on the sidewalk outside Romano's, Alexander tried to push away the uncomfortable feelings that were rising in his chest. He had worked hard to become the man he was today. Alexander Sterling was powerful, respected, and wealthy beyond most people's dreams. He had left his past behind long ago, and he wasn't about to let some random waitress make him sentimental about things that couldn't be changed. But as he walked back into the restaurant, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this evening was going to change everything. He didn't know how or why, but something was about to happen that would turn his carefully controlled world upside down. Maya was clearing dishes from a nearby table when Alexander returned to his seat. Their eyes met again across the dining room, and this time both of them felt it. A connection that neither could explain but neither could ignore. The stage was set for a revelation that would shock them both. Maya's heart was racing as she walked back to the kitchen. That signature she had glimpsed at table 15 wouldn't leave her mind. The bold, confident strokes looked so familiar, but she couldn't figure out where she had seen it before. She needed a moment to think clearly. "Hey, you okay?" Carmen asked, noticing Maya's pale face as she entered the kitchen area. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Maya replied, but her voice was shaky. "Just need some water." She went to the staff area and sat down for a moment, pulling the worn photograph from her apron pocket. Her hands trembled as she turned it over to look at her father's signature on the back. The faded blue ink spelled out his name in the same bold style she had just seen at table 15. "It can't be," Maya whispered to herself. "It's just a coincidence. Lots of people probably write their names like that." But even as she tried to convince herself, Maya knew deep down that the signatures were identical. Every curve, every letter, the way the pen had moved across the paper. It was exactly the same as the signature on her father's photograph. Meanwhile, at table 15, Alexander was trying to focus on the final details of the merger. But his mind kept wandering to the young waitress who seemed so familiar. There was something about her eyes, the way she moved, that reminded him of someone from long ago. Sterling. "We need your signature on page 12, Mr. Chen said, sliding another document across the table. Alexander picked up his expensive pen and began to sign his name. As he wrote, he didn't notice Maya approaching their table again. She was carrying a small tray with their coffee order, but her eyes were fixed on his hands as he signed the document. Maya stopped walking. Her entire body went cold as she watched Alexander's pen move across the paper. It was identical, absolutely identical, to the signature on her father's photograph. The same confident strokes, the same bold letters, the same exact style that she had looked at thousands of times growing up. The coffee cups on her tray began to shake as her hands trembled. Maya felt like the floor was spinning beneath her feet. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Alexander finished signing and looked up to see Maya standing frozen beside their table. Her face was white as paper, and she was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. "Miss, is everything all right?" Alexander asked, concerned by her appearance. Maya tried to speak, but no words came out. She was looking at the man who might be her father, the father she had never met, the man her mother had loved and lost, the person Maya had wondered about her entire life. And he was here, wealthy and powerful, while she had been struggling to pay for her mother's medicine. I need to, Maya started to say, but her voice broke. Maya, what's wrong? Carmen had followed her from the kitchen and was now standing beside her, worried. Hearing her name seemed to break Alexander out of his business focus. Maya. Something about that name stirred a memory deep in his mind. A memory of a young woman he had loved long ago, a woman named Isabella, who used to call her future daughter Maya if it was a girl. Alexander's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. His face went pale as he stared at Maya with new understanding. The dark eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held herself with dignity despite her obvious struggles. She looked exactly like Isabella had at that age. What's your last name? Alexander asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Rodriguez, Maya whispered. The wine glass in Alexander's hand fell to the floor, shattering into pieces that scattered across the marble. The crash echoed through the restaurant, and conversations at nearby tables stopped as people turned to see what had happened. Alexander sat frozen in his chair, staring at Maya with a mixture of shock, recognition, and something that looked like terror. Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez. The woman he had loved 25 years ago. The woman he had left behind when his world fell apart. Maya's hands were shaking so badly now that the coffee cups on her tray were rattling. With trembling fingers, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small photograph of her father. She turned it over to show the signature on the back. Sir, Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion. That's my dad's signature. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at the photograph in Maya's hands, recognizing his own handwriting from so many years ago. He remembered writing that message to Isabella, remembered promising her his love always, remembered believing they would have a future together. Mr. Chen and Ms. Williams exchanged confused glances. The merger meeting had suddenly taken a very strange turn, and they had no idea what was happening. I think we should give you some privacy, Ms. Williams said quietly, starting to gather her papers. But Alexander wasn't paying attention to his business partners anymore. He was looking at Maya, his daughter, the child he never knew existed. The young woman who had been struggling to make ends meet while he lived in luxury just miles away. Isabella's daughter, Alexander said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. You know my mother? Maya asked, hope and anger mixing in her voice. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, 25 years of buried guilt and regret washing over him. Yes, I knew your mother. I loved your mother. Maya felt like she might faint. The restaurant around her seemed to blur as the reality of the situation hit her. This wealthy, powerful man who probably spent more on a single meal than Maya made in a month, this was her father. The man who had abandoned her mother. The man who had left them to struggle alone. You left her, Maya said, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. You left us. The accusation hit Alexander like a physical blow. He saw the pain in Maya's eyes, the years of hardship written on her face despite her young age. She was his daughter, and she had grown up without him while he built his empire. Maya, Alexander started to say, but he didn't know how to finish. How could he explain 25 years of absence? How could he tell her about the mistakes he had made, the cowardly choices that had kept him away from the woman he loved and the daughter he never knew he had? Carmen stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Maya's shoulders. Maybe you should sit down, she said gently. But Maya shook her head. She needed to know the truth. She needed to understand why her father had signature was on documents worth millions of dollars while she had been working double shifts just to afford her mother's medication. Where have you been? Maya asked, her voice stronger now despite the tears. My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me. She got sick, and we can barely afford her medicine. Where were you when we needed you? Alexander felt like his chest was being crushed. Every word Maya spoke was true, and every word made him realize the full scope of what his choices had cost. He had a daughter, a beautiful, strong, hard-working daughter who had needed him her entire life. I didn't know, Alexander said quietly. I didn't know you existed. That's not an excuse, Maya replied, her voice trembling with emotion. You left my mother. You made promises and then you disappeared. How could you not know? The other customers in the restaurant were trying not to stare, but it was impossible to ignore the emotional scene unfolding at table 15. Some people had their phones out, probably wondering if they should call for help. Alexander looked down at the broken wine glass on the floor, then back up at Maya. In her face, he could see Isabella, the woman he had loved more than anything else in his life. The woman he had hurt because he was too proud and too scared to stay and fight for their future together. I was young and stupid, Alexander said, his voice filled with regret. I made terrible mistakes and I've regretted them every day since. Regret doesn't pay for medicine, Maya said, wiping tears from her eyes. Regret doesn't keep the lights on or put food on the table. Mr. Chen and Ms. Williams had quietly gathered their papers and moved to another table, giving the family the space they clearly needed. The business deal that had seemed so important an hour ago now felt meaningless compared to what was happening. Alexander stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak. He wanted to reach out to Maya, to hold his daughter and tell her how sorry he was. But he could see the hurt and anger in her eyes, and he knew he had no right to ask for her forgiveness. Your mother, Alexander said softly. How is she? She's sick, Maya replied. Diabetes. She can barely work anymore, and the medical bills are... Maya's voice broke again. Alexander felt like he was drowning in guilt. While he had been building his fortune, his daughter had been taking care of her sick mother, working multiple jobs, sacrificing her own dreams. The irony was crushing. He had billions of dollars, and his family had been struggling just miles away. I want to help, Alexander said desperately. Please, let me help. Maya looked at him with eyes that held 24 years of questions, hurt and longing. Help? Where was your help when I was 7 and we got evicted from our apartment? Where was your help when I had to drop out of college to take care of Mom? Where was your help when I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't afford her insulin? Each question was like a knife to Alexander's heart. He had no answers that would make any of this right. He had no excuses that would justify 25 years of absence from their lives. The photograph was still in Maya's hands, shaking as she cried. Alexander looked at it. His younger self in military uniform, full of hope and dreams, writing a promise of forever love to a woman he would abandon just months later. I'm sorry, Alexander whispered, the words feeling completely inadequate. I'm so sorry. Maya stared at him for a long moment, this powerful man who was her father, this stranger who shared her DNA but had never been part of her life. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone beside the table covered with broken glass and billion-dollar contracts that suddenly meant nothing at all. Maya ran to the employee bathroom and locked the door behind her. Her whole body was shaking as she leaned against the sink, trying to process what had just happened. The man at table 15, the wealthy businessman who had just signed documents worth millions, was her father. The father she had imagined meeting her entire life was sitting just 30 feet away, and he was nothing like she had hoped. She looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes red from crying. Get yourself together, she whispered to her reflection. You still have tables to serve. You still need this job. But even as she tried to calm down, Maya's mind was racing with questions. How long had her father been living in the city? How many times might she have walked past him on the street without knowing? How could he have so much money while she and her mother had struggled for years? A soft knock on the bathroom door interrupted her thoughts. Maya, it's Carmen. Are you okay in there? Maya opened the door to find her friend waiting with worried eyes. What happened out there? Carmen asked gently. That man looked like he'd seen a ghost when you showed him that photo. He's my father, Maya said quietly, the words feeling strange on her lips. Carmen's eyes widened. What? But I thought you said your father left before you were born. He did. And now he's back, apparently rich enough to buy this entire restaurant. Maya's voice was bitter. While my mom and I have been scraping by, he's been living like a king. Carmen pulled Maya into a hug. Oh, honey, I can't imagine how you're feeling right now. I don't know what I'm feeling, Maya admitted. Angry, confused, hurt. I used to dream about meeting him someday, but not like this. Not when the first thing I see is him spending more on wine than I make in a week. What are you going to do? Maya took a deep breath. I need to finish my shift. I can't afford to lose this job no matter what's happening in my personal life. But when Maya returned to the dining room, she saw that Alexander was no longer at table 15. His business partners were gone too, leaving only the broken wine glass that a busboy was carefully cleaning up. Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. He left this for you, said Jennifer, the hostess, approaching Maya with an envelope. The gentleman from table 15. He said it was very important that you get it. Maya's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in the same handwriting she had known all her life from the photograph. Inside was a business card for Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, along with a handwritten note. Maya, please call me. We need to talk. There are things about the past that you need to know, things that might help you understand why I made the choices I did. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I'm asking anyway. Your father, Alexander. Maya stared at the note for a long time. Part of her wanted to tear it up and forget this whole night had happened. But another part of her needed answers to questions she had carried her entire life. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Maya went through the motions of serving customers, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. When her shift finally ended at 11 p.m., she sat in her old car in the parking lot, staring at Alexander's business card, Sterling Industries. Maya had heard that name before. It was one of the biggest companies in the city. She pulled out her phone and searched for Alexander Sterling online. What she found made her stomach drop. Articles about his business success, photos from charity events, interviews about his rise from humble beginnings to billionaire status. The man who had abandoned her mother was featured on the cover of business magazines, praised for his vision and leadership. Maya's phone rang, startling her. It was her mother. Mia, how was work tonight? Isabella's voice sounded tired but loving. Mom, I need to ask you something, Maya said, her voice shaking. And I need you to tell me the truth. What is it, sweetheart? My father. His name was Alexander, wasn't it? Alexander Sterling? The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that Maya thought the call had dropped. Mom? Are you there? How do you know that name? Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. I met him tonight. He was at the restaurant. Maya heard her mother gasp, then the sound of crying. Mom, please. I need to understand what happened. Why did he leave us? Through her tears, Isabella began to tell the story Maya had waited 24 years to hear. I was 19 when I met your father, Isabella said softly. He was 27, working at a small construction company, trying to start his own business. He was so handsome, so full of dreams and ambition. I fell in love with him immediately. Maya listened quietly as her mother continued. Alexander was different from other boys I had dated. He had big plans, big ideas about changing the world. He used to talk about building a company that would help people, about making enough money to take care of everyone he loved. I believed in him completely. What happened? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. His first business venture failed badly, Isabella explained. He had borrowed money from some very dangerous people to get started. When the company collapsed, Alexander owed them hundreds of thousands of dollars he didn't have. These weren't the kind of people who would just forgive a debt. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, dangerous people? Men who hurt people who couldn't pay them back. Alexander was terrified, not just for himself, but for me too. He knew that if he stayed, I could get hurt because of his mistakes. Isabella's voice broke as she continued. One night he came to see me. He was scared and desperate. He told me he had to leave the city, had to disappear until he could figure out how to pay back the money. I begged him to stay, told him we could face it together. But he left anyway, Maya said, feeling the old hurt rising in her chest. He said he loved me too much to put me in danger. He promised he would come back when it was safe, when he had found a way to fix everything. That was the last time I saw him. Maya closed her eyes, trying to process this new information. Did you know I was coming? I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after he left. I tried to find him, but it was like he had vanished completely. I even hired a private detective with money I couldn't afford to spend, but Alexander had covered his tracks too well. So he really didn't know about me. No, mija. If he had known, I believe he would have found a way to come back. Whatever else Alexander was, he was a good man who loved deeply. He would never have abandoned his child if he had known. Maya sat in her car, feeling her entire understanding of her father's shift. She had spent her whole life thinking he was a man who had walked away from responsibility, who had chosen his own freedom over his family. But the truth was more complicated than that. Mom, he's rich now. Really rich. He could have helped us all these years if he had just tried to find us. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Maybe he thought we were better off without him. Maybe he thought we had moved on, found happiness without him. People make assumptions when they're carrying guilt and shame. Are you defending him? Maya asked, surprised. No, mija, I'm not defending him. 24 years is a long time to stay away, no matter what the reasons were. But I'm trying to help you understand that people are complicated. The choices we make when we're young and scared don't always make sense later. Maya thought about her mother's words as she drove home to their small apartment. Isabella had never remarried, never even dated seriously. She had raised Maya alone, working multiple jobs, always putting her daughter's needs first. If anyone had the right to be angry at Alexander, it was her mother. But Isabella seemed more sad than angry, like someone who had made peace with old heartbreak long ago. The next morning, Maya called the number on Alexander's business card. Her hands were shaking as she dialed, and she almost hung up 3 times before someone answered. Sterling Industries, Mr. Sterling's office. I need to speak with Alexander Sterling. This is Maya Rodriguez. Please hold. Within seconds, Alexander's voice came on the line. Maya, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. I talked to my mother last night, Maya said without any greeting. She told me why you left. Alexander was quiet for a moment. What did she tell you? About the debt. About the dangerous people. About why you thought you had to disappear. Then you know that I didn't leave because I didn't love her. I left because I loved her too much to let her get hurt because of my mistakes. But you never came back, Maya said, her voice breaking. Even when you became successful, even when you had the money to pay off those debts, you never came back to find us. Alexander's voice was heavy with regret. By the time I had built the company and made enough money to feel safe, so many years had passed. I convinced myself that Isabella had moved on, found someone better. I thought she was probably married with children, living a happy life without the man who had brought so much trouble into her world. She never married anyone else, Maya said quietly. She never even dated. She spent 24 years raising your daughter alone, working herself into exhaustion to provide for us. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Maya could hear Alexander breathing, but he didn't speak for almost a minute. I made the worst mistake of my life, he finally said, his voice broken. I thought I was protecting her, but instead I condemned her to exactly the kind of hardship I was trying to spare her from. And I missed 24 years with my daughter. Maya wiped tears from her eyes. We need to meet. Somewhere private. I have questions and you owe me answers. Anything you want. When and where? Tomorrow. There's a small park near my apartment. Sunset Gardens. Meet me there at 2 p.m. I'll be there, Alexander promised. As Maya hung up the phone, she felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Tomorrow, she would face her father again, and this time they would have the conversation that was 24 years overdue. She didn't know if she would find forgiveness or just more pain, but she knew she needed to hear the full truth from the man who had shaped her life by his absence. Maya arrived at Sunset Gardens 15 minutes early. She sat on a wooden bench under an old oak tree, watching children play on the swings while their parents chatted nearby. This small park had been her escape as a child, when their apartment felt too cramped or when her mother was working late. Maya would come here to do homework or just think. Now at 24, she was about to have the most important conversation of her life in the same place where she used to dream about meeting her father someday. At exactly 2 p.m., Maya saw a familiar figure walking toward her. Alexander looked different outside the fancy restaurant. He was still wearing an expensive suit, but his shoulders seemed less confident, his walk less commanding. He looked like a man carrying the weight of 24 years of regret. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Alexander said as he approached the bench. May I sit? Maya nodded, moving over to make room. For a moment, they sat in uncomfortable silence, watching a little girl push her doll on the baby swings. "That could have been us," Alexander said quietly, his eyes on the child. "I should have been the one pushing you on those swings, teaching you to ride a bike, helping you with homework." "But you weren't," Maya replied, her voice steady but sad. "And we can't change that now," Alexander nodded. "You're right. But Maya, I need you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about your mother. Not a single day in 24 years. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by staying away, but deep down I knew I was being a coward." Maya turned to look at her father. Really look at him. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his hands shook slightly when he spoke about the past. "Tell me about those men you owed money to," Maya said. "Were they really that dangerous?" Alexander's jaw tightened. Tommy Marconi and his crew. They weren't just loan sharks, Maya. They were connected to organized crime. When my construction business failed, I owed them $400,000. Tommy made it very clear what would happen if I didn't pay. What did he say? He said he would hurt everyone I cared about until I found the money. He knew about your mother. He had photos of her leaving work, knew her schedule, knew where she lived. I realized that as long as I was in Isabella's life, she would never be safe. Maya felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "So you really were trying to protect her?" "I thought I was. But protection should have meant finding another way, not running away. I should have gone to the police, borrowed money from family, sold everything I owned. Instead, I chose the easiest path for me. I disappeared." Alexander pulled out his wallet and showed Maya an old, worn photograph. It was a picture of Isabella, young and smiling, taken some time before Maya was born. "I've carried this with me every day for 24 years, he said. "It's the only photo I had of the woman I loved more than my own life. I used to look at it and wonder if she was happy, if she had found someone who could give her the life she deserved." Maya stared at the photo of her young mother. "She never found anyone else. She told me once that her heart belonged to my father, and she couldn't give it to another man when it wasn't hers to give." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "She waited for me?" "She never said she was waiting, but she never moved on either. She focused all her love on raising me, on making sure I had everything I needed even when we had nothing. And I let her struggle alone while I built an empire," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Do you know what the worst part is? I could have paid off those debts within 5 years of leaving. By the time I was 35, I had enough money to buy Tommy Marconi's entire operation, but I was too ashamed to come back." Maya watched her father cry, and despite all her anger, she felt her heart softening. This wasn't the cold, heartless businessman she had imagined. This was a broken man who had made terrible choices and spent decades living with the consequences. "Why now?" Maya asked. "Why didn't you try to find us 10 years ago? 15 years ago?" "Because I'm a coward," Alexander admitted. "Every year that passed made it harder to come back. How do you explain to the woman you love that you've been alive and successful while she struggled? How do you face the child you never met and ask for forgiveness?" "You don't," Maya said simply. "You can't ask for forgiveness. You can only try to do better from now on." Alexander looked at her with surprise, and something that might have been hope. "Does that mean you're willing to give me a chance?" Maya was quiet for a long time, thinking about her mother's words from the night before. People are complicated. The choices we make when we're young and scared don't always make sense later. "I'm angry," Maya said finally. "I'm angrier than I've ever been in my life. But I'm also tired of wondering about my father. I'm tired of looking at that photograph and imagining what you might be like." "What do you want from me?" Alexander asked. "I want honesty. Complete honesty. No more secrets, no more lies, no more protected feelings. If we're going to try to have some kind of relationship, it has to be built on truth." "I can do that," Alexander promised. "And I want you to meet my mother. You owe her that conversation. You owe her the chance to say whatever she needs to say to your face." Alexander's hands trembled at the thought. Would she want to see me? I don't know. But you're going to find out. Over the next hour, Maya and Alexander talked about everything. Her childhood, his business success, the dreams they had both given up. and the future they might be able to build together. Alexander told her about the sleepless nights when he wondered if he had made a daughter somewhere in the world. Maya told him about the times she had imagined having a father to walk her to school or cheer at her graduation. "I want to help," Alexander said eventually. "Your mother's medical bills, your education, whatever you need. Please let me help." "No," Maya said firmly. "Not like that." Alexander looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I don't want your charity. I don't want you to throw money at 24 years of absence and call it even. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to earn it." "How?" Maya thought for a moment. "Start by showing up. Not with your wallet, but with your time. Come to my mother's doctor appointments. Help her understand her medication. Sit with her when she's scared about her health. Be present for the small, ordinary moments, not just the big gestures." Alexander nodded slowly. "And what about us? What about our relationship? We'll figure it out as we go. But it has to be real, not something built on guilt or obligation. I want to know who you really are, not just the successful businessman. And you need to know me as I am, not as the daughter you imagined." "I'd like that very much," Alexander said. As the afternoon wore on, Maya found herself seeing glimpses of the man her mother had fallen in love with. When Alexander talked about his dreams of helping people through his business, when he laughed at Maya's stories about difficult customers at the restaurant, when he asked genuine questions about her hopes for the future, those moments felt real. "There's something else," Maya said as the sun began to set. "If we're going to do this, you need to understand that I won't be your charity case or your pet project. I have my own goals and dreams. Tell me about them. I want to finish college and study business. I want to start a nonprofit organization that helps families dealing with medical debt. I've seen how the system fails people like us, and I want to change that." Alexander's eyes lit up with pride. "That sounds like something the world needs." "I'll take a loan for school," Maya continued. "A real loan that I'll pay back with interest. And when I start my nonprofit, I'll accept a donation from Sterling Industries, but only if it's handled like any other business partnership." "You're as stubborn as your mother," Alexander said with a small smile. "Good. Stubborn people don't give up when things get hard." They arranged to meet again the following week, this time with Isabella. Maya wasn't sure how that conversation would go, but she knew it needed to happen. Her mother deserved the chance to face the man who had shaped so much of her life through his absence. As they walked toward the park exit, Alexander stopped suddenly. "Maya, I need you to know something. Finding you, meeting you today, it's the best thing that's happened to me in 24 years. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you should have had." Maya looked at this man who was a stranger and her father at the same time. "You can't be the father I should have had. That ship sailed a long time ago, but maybe you can be the father I need now." 6 months later, Maya was sitting in a college classroom taking notes on nonprofit management. Her tuition was paid through a loan from Sterling Industries at standard interest rates, a business arrangement that Alexander had insisted on documenting properly. Isabella's health had improved dramatically with better medical care and less financial stress. Alexander had indeed started showing up, to doctor appointments, to family dinners, to ordinary Tuesday evenings when they watched television together. He was learning to be present instead of absent, to listen instead of fix, to earn his place in their lives instead of buying it. Maya's nonprofit, Second Chances Foundation, had received its first major donation from Sterling Industries. The board of directors included Maya as founder and president, Alexander as a contributing member, and Isabella as community outreach coordinator. They were helping families navigate medical debt and connecting them with resources they didn't know existed. The relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, conversations that touched on old wounds, and times when Maya felt overwhelmed by having a father after 24 years without one. But it was real and honest, and growing stronger each day. On graduation day, Maya walked across the stage to receive her bachelor's degree in business management. In the audience, Isabella cried tears of pride while Alexander applauded with the enthusiasm of a man who had learned that the greatest success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the family he had almost lost forever. After the ceremony, Maya found her parents waiting for her with flowers and smiles. "I'm proud of you," Alexander said, and Maya could hear 24 years of missed "I'm proud of you" moments in those simple words. "We did it together," Maya replied, looking at both her parents. "All of us." The photograph in Maya's wallet now showed 3 people instead of 1, a family that had found each other despite the years and mistakes and missed opportunities. It wasn't the family story Maya had imagined as a child, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough.